So hey everybody from Bowling Green State University. Hello. So we're having a great time. We're on the final day of our residency on collaborative change and innovation, and the weekend has been full. We have had an amazing, fun, deep experience. We've had laughter to the point that someone said they've got a headache from laughing so much. To having a critical issue, which in Northwest Ohio, I think we're in the top 3 areas in Northwest Ohio in human trafficking. And so we had the task force leaders in Ohio come in, and the group worked on designing a summit that they are going to pro bono work to put on for them in partnership with our Masters in Organization Development and Change Program students, a pro bono team to deliver an event to bring together various stakeholders and other folks and participants. It's a really neat design that they've come up with to put on an event for them to bring people together to better address that and better coordinate and better connect all the people that care about this, so they can work better together to eradicate human trafficking and address it in Northwest Ohio. And so it was very, very, as you know, it's a really, really heart-wrenching and pulling topic. And so they worked on that. We've had a good discussion this morning. We've had Drum Cafe in and put on an event for the community with Dale Monin, who's from Drum Cafe. He's in the cohort for the doctoral program. And Dale performed with his team. They flew in and put on a brilliant show and performance, which is a highly interactive drumming experience, which was wonderful. It was streamed, and we also had a lot of fun in the informal, as they like to call it, the informal open spaces that we had all around our formal events. So it's been a wonderful group and time and together. This is their first time being together in person throughout our program, because since the pandemic, this is our pandemic baby. And so they're, and they have done really well in working with all the different challenges and all the stuff, and they have bonded. So I'm so grateful for that. For those of you that are here and today for this All Things Change webinar series, podcast series, it became a mini summit. A mini just-in-time conference, if you will. I sent out an ask and said, who would like to come and chat with our students? And I had 25 people plus. A lot of people said they wish they had the time, they couldn't, but they would like to help and be a part of the conversation as we go. And I was just overwhelmed with the generosity that you all offered. And so our focus is on a few questions that you all have as prompts. And if you'll share with us your wisdom, your expertise, your views, your insights around those prompts as you see fit, it'd be awesome. I think we've had 2 days of it so far, Thursday, Friday, yet this is our 3rd day of this, and it's been wonderful. And I'm so grateful for you all. Thank you for being a part of this. And this is a beginning of a conversation. I want to say that my commitment to you and to our world at large and all the people that do this work as thought leaders and founders and leaders of different various methodologies from around the world, my commitment is that we continue the conversation, that we continue to elevate the conversation, and we create a space for you all to connect with each other, to connect with people from around the world, and create that nexus, that central garden. And that's my commitment. It's my passion. And it seems like we're ready to kind of get back together after the pandemic a bit. So more to come on this. Today is a beginning of a reconnection and the next steps in our conversation. So again, thank you. I'm really grateful. And from all of us here, we are super grateful. And you'll get a chance to talk with them after we go through the panel, sharing your thoughts and your ideas. So Gervase, thank you. Jervis.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm sorry. People my best friends sometimes call me Steve Caddy, and I'll go, and I'll go, it's Katie, and I have to remind myself, because I read and I go, my brain goes right on to what I'm reading. So Jervis, thank you. I just want to say that you have encouraged me to step into leadership for our field and for what we do. And so I am so appreciative of that encouragement from you. Your confidence or belief in me has emboldened me. So thank you for that. So I'm here today doing this in part because of your encouragement. Thank you.
Well, I'm really pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
Steve. Hello, everybody. Hello, PhD class, or whatever you call yourselves. Hello. Before we started, Frances was telling me one of the things that she's liked about the conference so far is people telling their backstory, which I hadn't planned to do, but maybe I'll tell you a little bit about that. I started out in the OD field when I was 19. I wandered into a T group by mistake and had an amazing time. And at the time, wanted to be a student radical. This was the era of the anti-Vietnam War time, and it was big fun to try to change the world. And I found organization development, and it really sang to me. And I got so engaged in that by my early 20s. I was doing my doctorate at Case. And so fully engaged in what organization development meant at that time. And about 20 years later, Dave Cooperrider, who had been a fellow student, was promulgating this thing called appreciative inquiry, which I found fascinating and started to study. And I did a study in the early 2000s where we looked at all the cases that had been written on appreciative inquiry in the academic literature. And we kind of did a meta-analysis. And coming out of that study, what I realized was that when appreciative inquiry was transformational, it was doing some things that violated the basic OD model. Because up until then, I had thought of appreciative inquiry as kind of action research with a positive question. And when I came out of that study, I realized there's some very different things going on here. And I started to think about that, and I started to think about how that applied to other sorts of change processes that had started to emerge in the last 10, 15 years. And at the same time as I was doing that, Bob Marshak was doing a similar critique, coming at it from discourse, the organizational discourse field. And we found each other and started writing together. And what evolved into what's been called Dialogic OD. Dialogic OD isn't a method, it's an attempt to make sense of all the methods that this conference has talked about and to identify the underlying change processes in all these methods. And that's the ambition of it. And that's what we've tried to do. And so all our writing is really about trying to develop a synthesis. And OD began with a diagnostic mindset that replaced a mechanistic way of looking at organizations with an organic way. It brought in this organic metaphor, and that had a real powerful impact. But if you look at organizations from an organic point of view, then it makes sense that you want to go in, do a diagnosis, figure out what's going on with the organism, figure out some kind of treatment, and so on and so forth. And then during the 80s and 90s, what happened was that a dialogic mindset began to emerge that replaced this organic metaphor with more of a social construction approach. Right? It started looking at organizations as networks of meaning making. And the reason we came up with the term Dialogic OD was, at the time when we first wrote it, was because all these different methods agreed that the way you create change is by changing the conversation. However you go about doing that. That was the basic similarity. And then, around the turn of the century, then the sort of complex adaptive systems, complexity thinking started to enter in as well. And so Dialogic OD became this kind of combination of these two root metaphors. And the thing is that just about any of these methods can be used from a diagnostic or a dialogic mindset. Right. It really depends, and that's what we argue. It's not about the method, it's about the mindset of the practitioner that makes a difference to the impact and the outcomes that develop. And we've written a lot on what these differences are, but fundamentally, a diagnostic mindset says, first we have to figure out what's going on, then we decide what to change. Right. And a dialogic mindset says, no, we're creating change at the same time as we're inquiring. That inquiry is the process for creating change. And when you look at any sort of long-term organizational change process, you probably find both of these in operation. And I think in the research that's now going on, that's what we're starting to see emerge. And there's a very recent study in JABS looking at this, the way they defined the differences was interesting. They said they were looking at how leaders thought about the change, and the diagnostic change, they're worried about what's true. Tell me what's true. Whereas in a dialogic change, they're interested in what do people think is possible? That's the question they're asking. And in the study, they found that when leaders just asked what's true, 2 out of 3 times the change process failed. When they added in this question about what do people think is possible, 9 out of 10 times they were successful. So, you know, that's a pretty compelling sort of difference here. So, you know, we've talked about what we think are the underlying sort of enablers of transformational change: emergence, narrative, and generativity. And then more recently, what I'm starting to write about now is that I think these collaborative methods actually have 2 different change strategies that are utilized. One I'm calling high engagement, and the other I'm calling generative. And the difference is this: it's the same method, whether it's conferencing or appreciative inquiry or open space or future search or World Cafe, or, you know, I got a bibliography now of over 45 of these that I've been collecting, and there's a few more I'm learning about through this conference. In a high engagement change process, fundamentally what happens is the senior leadership has a vision of some sort. They know where they want to, and by vision, I mean, we know what we want to look like some point in the future. We know how we want things to be, but we're not quite sure how to get there, or we know it's important that people need to feel some ownership and participation in this. So we're going to use these collaborative methodologies to engage folks, probably large groups of stakeholders, in developing ideas either for how to do things or what to do. And then we're going to take those and move them back into the normal performance system. We'll make decisions about which ones to use, and we'll drive the implementation. Right? So high engagement, get folks involved, but still primarily being driven down in a top-down way. In a generative change process, what happens is you have leaders who say, we don't know what the answer is to this problem, but we know what the problem is. And we're going to, and so what we start with is not a vision, but a purpose. And a purpose is what we're trying to do every day. We say, this is our purpose. So DBS Bank went through a transformation. Their purpose was joyful banking, which the CEO of the company still sort of laughs at himself when he comes up with that. But it's like, so we pick, in this case, joyful banking is something I would call a generative image. Who knows what the heck that means, but it's attractive. It pulls people into these conversations. We say to them, we want more joyful banking. What do you think that would look like? And people come into these conversations, and what these conversations are designed to do in either a collaborative, but in particularly in a generative change process, is produce new ideas people want to act on. And the second really big difference about a generative change process then is at the end of that conversation, the leadership says to the people, okay, just go do it. Don't wait for a plan. Don't wait for a budget. Just go do it tomorrow. We know what we want to do. You know what you think you should do. Just go do it. So the purpose is to stimulate as many pilot projects as possible with the explicit instruction. We don't expect you to succeed, but we expect you to try, and we're going to learn. And so generative change process is you try stuff out and you learn as you go. And the role of leadership in that kind of change process is quite different, because what it does is it comes in behind. It's not so front loaded, it's back loaded. And then it pays close attention to all the things that are taking place. And it's kind of a farming metaphor. You know, you pull out the weeds, you fertilize the good stuff, you amplify it, build it up. And I think there's a lot of now evidence that these generative approaches produce far more change far more rapidly than a high engagement approach, where, like the case study in my book on generative change, you know, these shop floor folks in a large supply chain were able to, because they decided that this would be a good thing to do, transform turnaround time from 3 days to 1 day. Orders coming in from the field, turn them around 3 days to 1 day. How much time I got left there, Steve? 5 minutes. Oh, I got less time. And they did it in 6 weeks after the generative event. They came out of that and said, we want to do this. And in 6 weeks, they were doing it. Now, in my experience, if they had come out of that event and given to leadership, here's a bunch of ideas for how to do that. 6 weeks later, the leaders would still be talking about it. Like, And that's the kind of rapid turnaround I'm talking about, I think is possible from using a more generative approach. So since I got a few more minutes, I'll just amplify that a bit more. So here are I think the 5 differences between a high engagement approach and a generative approach. Number one, a high engagement approach, or number one, a generative approach focuses on purpose, not vision. A vision is a view of an end state. A purpose is what we're trying to do every day. And you can't create emergent change without a common purpose. Because what happens is, if we don't have a common purpose and we invite people to invent the future, what will happen is they'll break down into their own me and mine. And I'll look at, and what I'll be proposing will be in the service of me and mine. And so for a collective, for people to create emergent change that's good for the collective, we all have to agree on what we're trying to do, and we have to care about it. And that's why generative image is so useful here. It's like leadership has to articulate a purpose that the stakeholders who are going to have to change have to care about, because if they don't care about it, they're not going to. But if they do, if they really care about it, then we can use like an open space, and people will come up with great stuff they want to do. And and as long as there's a few guardrails in place, leadership can say, just go do it. So the events are designed, and whether we're talking about an appreciative inquiry or a hackathon, there's so many different ways in which this thing is used, particularly outside of OD. All these organizations that are trying to create agile and adaptive systems, they're basically doing the same thing if they understand what they're doing. And one of the really great marketing tools these days is the number of organizations that went through lockdown and were able to transform in a couple of weeks, to go to remote work. And you ask them, how did you do that? And they go, well, the people did it. And actually they engaged in a generative change process. You just don't understand it. If you can lay out the sort of steps, and they go, oh, that's how we do it. We can do it more than once. So these conversations are designed primarily to help people with similar motivations and interests find each other, to identify something they want to go do that's going to help move the ball forward, whatever the purpose is, and then unleash them. And then the super important part is to be tracking and fanning what's going on in the back end. Like, you can't just let it go. You have to pay attention, and you have to already have put into place structures and processes even before the event, so that how are people going to get resources? How are you going to track what's taking place? How is leadership going to stay involved and engaged? So on and so forth. Anyway, that's my 15-minute rant. Thank you. And I'm done.
Thank you.
So I guess I'm supposed to just go next. Thank you. Could I share my screen? Is that okay?
Yes, you can. Let's see. Steve, I don't know if you have to make Tonje a co-host. Okay, thank you.
It's not very important if it's a hassle.
You can, Tonje.
You should have it now.
Okay, thank you. So are you able to see my screen now?
Not yet.
Okay, that's strange. Then I think there's some system preferences. I won't make more time to do this, okay? I'll just manage without. Okay. So thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Tonje Flack, and I am a partner at Fuelbox. And I would like to start with some real fundamentals, because collaboration is about people, right? And business is about people. And we need to remember that we don't build a business, we build people, and then people build the business. And that is something so fundamental you think it's unnecessary to say, but if when you see how people run their businesses today, I think it's important to kind of address this and say, if you acknowledge that you build people and people build your business, you need to also acknowledge some fundamentals about people, as who are we and what are our needs as human beings. And as human beings, we have a fundamental need to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, and to feel that we belong. And if we feel this in the workplace with our teammates, that is, I think, the best start off of a collaborative change. Because what is change without trust? How can you really collaborate if you do not trust each other? And we know now that psychological safety in a team is essential in order to succeed in a team. So our approach is all about how do you then enable people to have conversations that builds trust? Because I think, sorry? Okay. Because I think that today, and especially with the pandemic, people has become more aware on the importance of building social relations and building trust in teams. And people are talking about psychological safety a lot. But the key thing is, how do we build this? Because we can't just say, a lot of businesses now have values, and they say the trust or psychological safety, that's our values. This is how we are supposed to be with each other. But I can just say to you, you should trust me, and then you do. We need to engage in specific activities that actually builds trust. And if we go to research, we can see that there are some specific things we can do that builds trust. Brene Brown has a lot of great research on this, but there's also one thing that I've learned from neuroscientists. Because neuroscientists, they see the brain and they know what part of the brain is that light up when you engage in different things, and they can see, oh, how does this affect us, right? And there's a part of the brain inside of our brain which is called temporal parietal junction, but as we just, that's a very, now that's a Latin name, but we call it the connection center. And this is the center in the brain that lights up when we engage in things that actually builds trust. And these neuroscientists, they say that there's one thing that trumps everything when it comes to building great relations and building trust. And that is to engage in conversations face to face. And even more importantly, that we engage in conversations where we share something personal with each other. That doesn't mean that we have to share private information. There's a difference between personal and private, but being personal, sharing something that makes the other person understand who you are, where do you come from, sharing some of your dreams, aspirations, experiences, showing off who am I, that makes us trust each other. And I think you probably all heard the saying, personal is the new professional. And I think that this is so true. And in order for us to actually create those teams that could collaborate great together, we need to invest time in these kind of conversations. And they are too important for us to just think that they would emerge for themselves. We need to create the arenas. We need to, create these conversations. And people don't often ask questions that are, a bit deep or out of the blue. The people that do that rarely, they often seem that's a bit strange, right? So for order to making this conversation actually happen, that's the core of our approach, and that's a tool. That's a specific tool, which it's super simple. It's open-ended questions, divided in different categories. You pick a question, and that kickstarts a conversation. And I was also, one of the questions you prompted for us was to share an inspirational story. And I'd like to share a story about a great inspiration of mine. He was actually the father of our current NATO Secretary General. He was called Thorvald Stoltenberg, and he too was a politician and diplomat. And just how many minutes do I have left, Steve? Okay, thanks. Yes, he had many different roles in his career. Amongst those, he was Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense. And during having these roles, he started to do something quite rare or unique. He started to invite state leaders for breakfast at his personal home when they came to Norway, when they came to collaborate about state affairs. He invited them for breakfast. He served them a simple breakfast over his kitchen table with only one purpose, and that was to build a connection with them, to build their relationship. Because he knew that it was much easier for them to collaborate in a good way after they had built their personal relation like this. And well, this was 30 and 40 years ago. And I think that he hadn't read any research or neuroscience about it. He just knew, he just felt in his heart that it's so much more easier to collaborate when you have built a personal relation and trust. And I once met Thorvald Stoltenberg. I think it's 20 years ago now. And I must say, I have never, ever met someone that good at just meeting people. He was a person that asked questions to everyone he met. And even more importantly, he genuinely listened to the answers. He struck me as a person who was much more interested in gaining knowledge and from others, understanding others, than to kind of, how do you say that, than showing off his own excellence. So he is a true inspiration to me. And well, the last question I think was, what was it again? It was, what's your future hopes? What are your hopes for the future through collaboration was the last question. And then I would like to quote, I don't know actually who said it. I think different people have said it. But I think one thing I really truly hope is that we more and more can replace fear of the unknown with curiosity. And also together with that, to look for the things, proactively look for the things that unite us instead of focusing on our differences. And that kind of sums up what our approach is all about. On the one hand, we have this concrete specific tool which kickstarts conversations. But then again, it's, even if you open the box and you read out the question, nothing magical happens by just doing that. The magic happens when the conversation partners actually invest and are genuinely interested in seeing, hearing, acknowledging, and create belonging together. Okay, thank you. I think my time is up.
Awesome. Thank you, Tonje.
Right, seems that's my time, and I also need to share. I'll try to share as well. Let's see whether it works with me, but I'll try a little bit later. If not, it's not a problem. I can also post it in the chat. So do I have sharing permission? I do. I think I do have, but I'll try that later. Cool. Thanks so much. That was very impressive, both of you, Gervase and Tonje. And I think I'm going to just repeat what Tonje just said in my words. It's probably the same with the difference that I'm not sharing a tool. I'm not presenting a tool, probably not even approach, but only some principles. But they're more or less the same, like the principles that the two of you presented before. So sorry for that repetition, but maybe it has a little bit different twist. I'm Holger. I'm calling from a little village near Berlin in Germany. And before I go into what I want to talk about, the change days, I have a couple of questions to you. And you don't need to answer the questions in the chat or something like that. Just answer them for themselves in your mind. So the first question is, how many conferences have you attended in your life? And if I say conference, I mean conferences. I know open space is originally also called, I think, open space conferences, but it's not a conference in that sense. For me, I'm a big fan of open space. So conferences, where it says conferences. So how many conferences have you attended? I guess some of you probably 50 or 100 or something like that. Second question is, why do you go to conferences? Why do you actually go to conferences? What's the reason for it? And I guess most of you will come up with a few, with like 2 or 3 or 4 reasons. I guess some will say probably networking, expand your knowledge, present your ideas. And the next question is, or it's 2 questions. Think about your worst and your best conference experience. And why was it the worst and why was it the best conference experience? And now, again, the question, which was the second question, why do you go to conferences? I can say I've obviously attended a lot of conferences. I learned a lot of good things. I paid a lot of money. I traveled. And then when I ended up in the conference, there is kind of things which seem to be similar in many conferences. First of all, you enter and the first thing you see is the big posters of the sponsors. And then obviously all the registration processes and things like that. And then in many conferences, you end up at big tables. It's called the banquet tables, where 8 round tables, you all know that, where 8 people sit around. And if you're in a big room with 50 or 100 or even more of those tables, I've been to conferences where there were 1,000 people in one room. You can't understand what people are saying at the other side of the table. So you are supposed to work together at that banquet table, but you can't understand. So you can maybe talk to your neighbor. And then, of course, conferences have usually they have keynotes, which sometimes are very engaging, very insightful. And it's usually big names which come, Brené Brown or Simon Sinek or people like that. And then you go to, sometimes it's called workshops, sometimes it's called presentations. It's funny, it's called workshops, but you end up sitting with 100 or 200 people in another room, and it's not a workshop, it's a presentation. And yeah, you end up going, and of course you have the coffee breaks and the dinners and things like that, which is really the big value, which is what Harrison Owen described, why he developed open space technology. Because this is the cool thing, and this is why Harrison Owen said, okay, we want to have an ongoing coffee break instead of lots of boring presentations where people try to sell, well, that's the last point, people try to sell their product or their book or their tool or something like that. So as I said, I'm Holger, I'm the founder of the Change Days. The Change Days is not an approach, or not very much, it's definitely not a tool. It's a set of principles which try to change the conference experience. And it wasn't planned like that. We started the first Change Days in 2009. It was called the Berlin Change Days, and it's still called the Berlin Change Days. But meanwhile, there's also the Toronto Change Days and the Australasian Change Days from Perth. Toronto going in their 4th year this year, and Perth Australasian into the 3rd year. We are going into our, I don't know, 14th year today, this year. Even in the pandemics, we had one face-to-face event. We try to call it festival, not conference, but I'll slip back to say conference from time to time. So I didn't invent the format. It really emerged over time. We started 2009, and maybe after 5, 6, 7 years, suddenly some principles emerged. And we're trying to repeat them and keep them in mind, because what happened is that people keep coming back. I know for years, a group of Australians came over every year to Berlin just to attend the Berlin Change Days. And people from the States and from Canada and from South Africa and from Asia and so on. And I was asking myself, why do people come back, and why are people so excited about what's happening there? And some answers I get, it's addictive, it's the best event I've ever attended, and things like that. And so with a group of friends who have been coming many times, we have been thinking about, so what's the idea behind it? I mean, the format is pretty simple, and even the format is not important. It's usually 2 to 3 days. It has some elements of conference, means very few keynotes, workshops, but then workshops which are real workshops. That means not more than 20, 30 participants in a room and really interactive, but a lot of interaction with all the attendees, usually around 150. A lot of interaction, a lot of things which Tonje, I hope I pronounced the name right, Tonje actually just said, a lot of interaction, a lot of trust building instantaneously, a lot of what Gervase said, a change in changing conversations. So how does it happen? So now I'm trying to share. Let me try. Yay, it works. So after some years, after 5, 6 years, 7 years, I don't know exactly, we came up with those principles, and they stand since then, and they are what basically make, I think, that approach of the change days special. So let me go through them. So the first thing is capacity building and transformation happen at the same time when people are in a space in which they feel confident to experiment. How you do that, probably with a tool like Tonje just said, or something like appreciative inquiry, doesn't matter, but you bring people into a room and you show them it's okay to experiment, you connect them and give them a possibility to play with thoughts and play with experience and share their experiences, share a personal story, and thus develop trust very, very early into the conversation, into the event. Second, everyone is a co-creator of their collective experience. So other than in traditional conferences, everybody is a part of this event and everybody contributes. Somebody said many years ago, at the Berlin Change Days, you can't just sit in a chair and consume. You have to do something. So we force people to do something, and not everybody likes it all the time. We have always 5 or 10% of attendees who say, "Ooh, where have I gotten myself into?" and they never come back, but the rest of the 90% come back. Members of the faculty provide both their focused contribution and engage into the wider experience equal to the audience to serve. And this is, we found, a very important point. We brief our facilitators, those who give a workshop, in that they should not just fly in, hold a presentation, and then disappear. Some still do. We cannot always avoid it, but most times you give a workshop, but then you blend into the bigger crowd again. And this is so important because everybody is on eye level. So they are not the superstars, the VIPs, but there's everybody who's part of this event. Fourth, high quality contributions and deep insights are crucial to create trust in the process and inspire participants. We spend a lot of time in talking to facilitators beforehand. We always had a big rally for people handing in proposals, and we talk to them, select them, and so on. So other than in open space, which I love, or Word Cafe or so, we do have workshops or presentations or contributions And this is the conference part where people also come to learn, where they want to get some insight from other people, which also happens with other methods, but this is part of the design. Fifth, the learning journey is integral to the experience. It begins before and continues after the event. So that means we start obviously before, more and more through virtual means, of course, but it's very important that there is an ongoing learning journey, and there is a hosting team, every year a different hosting team, which is proud of develop their approach to develop this learning journey. That means people go to workshops, they come back, they listen maybe to one, maximum two keynotes, they come back and then they digest what they have learned in small groups, not at big round tables. Six, in the learning journey, we give room to breathe and time for individual and collective sense making with all different kinds of methods. I mean, we steal from out of hosting, from appreciative inquiry, from all the methods which are there and which are described in the change handbook. So we haven't developed anything new. We just blend everything together and give room for participants to breathe, maybe also to take a time out, to go out and to the streets and digest what they hear, and then come back and exchange with their peers. The design reinforces that emotions and creativity are integral parts of the learning experience, and maybe I combine that with the eighth one: fun and joy connects people at peers, and this is very important. And I'll tell you the secret sauce. My secret professional desire, which I never followed, is an opera director. So I like big emotions, and we make sure that people go through big emotional experience in the learning journey through things we do, because we have learned that through the emotions, people are open to develop trust. They open up, and they like to learn. They like to connect their learning to their own experiences. And of course, there should be a lot of fun and joy in the whole thing. So do I still have time, Steve, or 1 minute? Okay, I could say so much. So let me post the principles which are here, and yeah, maybe I'll stop here. Thank you. Who do I hand over? Who's the last one?
Next is Mannie and David.
Yeah, okay. Well, hello.
Hi, everybody.
And David and I are going to do a double act because we work very closely together. We have done so for many years. We're co-authors of books. We are also co-directors and co-workers in organizational development interventions. And listening to everybody, it's really been fascinating to hear Gervase and Tonje and Holger, because so much of what you have said resonates with the kinds of principles and practices that we engage at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London, where we are based. And we also want to describe to you an intervention that we conducted together at the end of last week on Thursday and Friday, which encapsulates so much of what you have said in terms of your understandings and your experience of change processes in organizations. But we want to highlight one particular aspect, which is that while we are interested, of course, in how internal processes occur in organizations, we also have an interest in inter-organizational collaboration and change. And we find that in many of the clients that we work with, especially the global clients, international collaboration with different organizations in different time zones, in different countries that also enjoy different religious faiths and things like that. A collaboration lifts up a gear, in taking into account sometimes enormous differences between people, as well as taking into account those elements that people share in common. Okay, so David and I are going to leapfrog each other and try and share with you some of our thinking and our experiences of change process. David.
Okay, again, I like to echo Mannie. It's very interesting to hear other people's contributions earlier on today. And I'm very taken by the idea of connection and conversations and trust and making relationships, etc., with people in order to be able to make meaningful collaborations. I think those are very important aspects. But I think also we need to take into account the structural properties of the system that we're in. And often there are structural difficulties that organizations have in which their structures are dysfunctional. And it doesn't really matter how much people trust each other or like each other. There are structural things that they need to resolve and they need to take into account. So I would go back to the original ideas of the Tavistock Institute, which is really about socio-technical systems, that we really have to keep in mind the social system, the sentient system, which I think a lot of people have been talking about earlier, but the sentient system can also be very affected by the structural properties, the way people are placed in relation to each other in their subsystems, and whether they work together or don't work together. So although it's important to think about the emotional life of the system, the emotional life can be very influenced by the structural properties, the way people are placed in relation to each other. And I think that's been a bit sort of forgotten about recently, that the structure does dictate some of the processes, and you can get all the processes right and how people feel about each other, but if they're aligned in a way that creates conflict and dysfunction, that needs to be addressed and looked at. So maybe we could describe a little bit about what we did last week, Mannie.
Yes, fine. Well, it's David and I and two others in our team are working with a global high-tech company that are located in both sides of America, in various countries in Europe, and are very highly present in Asia. India, Sri Lanka, Singapore, and further afield into Australia. So it's a diverse group of people, and somehow they have to be knitted together to work effectively as teams and so on. But the structure, as David was saying, the structural elements can sometimes be real handicaps. And when we met them on Thursday, several times, a group of 40 senior managers who have been invested in by the company as future leaders in the company. And several times they said, we've done this kind of management or leadership training many times. And every time we make recommendations, we've got resolutions, we've come together cooperatively and so on, but nothing changes. And it's quite depressing. And they said, here we are again. We are, and they did express a lot of positive hope that this time it was going to be different. So our design was on Thursday and Friday was open space from the opening moment. There was some introduction by the client, the host, but it lasted a few minutes, and we got straight into open space. And within minutes, the issues that the people were concerned about and not just concerned, but were passionate about, that kept them up at night, disturbed them. They wanted to see change, believed that change was imperative. Within minutes, there was a list as long as your arm of the issues that needed to be, they said, needed to be resolved. And it took us about a day to reduce 40 issues, 40 ideas, down to 20, down to 8, and then down to 7. Each iteration leading to a more refined definition of the problem. And then morning of the second day, they had to reduce the 7 down to 4. And it was a huge job. There was much conflict about it, but we said to them, this is part of the process. The ideas that have been expressed already around trust, psychological safety, conversations, what do people think is possible? All these, what things have to be let go of? All these things were part of the conversation right from the start. One point to bear in mind, it was the first time that David and I and our team did a program like this entirely online. So there were huge technological challenges for us and for them because they were dispersed around the world. They were using different
3 time zones.
Yeah, and they were using different technologies and so on, but we managed it. Okay, so I don't know how much time we have left, but we want to share with you a very old but famous diagram. Just give me a moment. I'll see if I can do it. Share. This is it, yes. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. So this is it's an incomplete diagram. I'll explain why. But you can see it looks like a futuristic something or other. Can you guess what it is? Well, it probably tells you in the text. This is a meeting of 4 people, A, B, C, and D. They are representatives of 4 organizations. Okay, the point we want to make, the thing that's missing here is you can see in the organizations, A, B, C, and D, there's a double line around the organization. Can you see that? Just put your fingers up if you can see what I'm saying. Okay, the people inside should also have double lines, and the individuals, A, B, C, and D, should also have double lines. And the reason for that is that in every exchange, we always have 2 boundaries to cross, at least 2 boundaries to cross. Namely, the one that's in our head, the thoughts, the private thoughts, the emotions, the fantasies, the anxieties, the fears, the hopes, the aspirations. That's the one boundary that we have to cross. And the other is the structural one, the one that brings us into contact with the other, the social presentation, the roles that we're in, the jobs we have, the responsibilities we have, and so on. And these double boundaries are not properly reflected in this diagram. But the point we want to make is that in any meeting of this nature, and this is just a sample, 4 people meeting from 4 different organizations, before the meeting can even begin, everyone has to cross 17 boundaries.
Huh.
So it's a huge task. And of course, when one approaches such a meeting, usually, one has anxieties about how one's going to be perceived, how one's going to be received, how one's going to be experienced. And I liked Tanya's example of Stoltenberg breakfast at home, which is absolutely wonderful, because I guess breakfast at home reduces the formality of these boundaries and reduces, therefore, consequently, the anxieties that people feel. Now, we mentioned, David, maybe you can say something about anxieties in the unconscious?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that need to be taken into the collaboration is that people bring all sorts of feelings and fantasies, some of them unconscious, into these meetings. And when you're meeting with another organization around some common issue, there can be a lot of rather primitive anxieties raised in all of the people involved in it. Anxious about how they're going to be seen, anxious about whether they're going to survive the meeting. So there's subject to a lot of projective processes and introjective, things that you take in from the other side, which you may not be aware of. So I think as consultants, you need to be able to think about that as data, that these projective processes are giving you a lot of information about what's going on inside the client system, because if you're sitting in on these meetings as a consultant, you're picking them up, you're having feelings, what we would call the countertransference, and that's all data about what's going on in the projective processes. And often, we know that mergers never work because the projective processes really never get dealt with, because when two organizations are going into a merger, we know that there are going to be losses. There are going to be winners and losers. If there's going to be one HR organization instead of two, people are going to lose their jobs. There's a lot of anxiety around these collaborative processes, particularly with inter-organizational mergers. So if you're not paying attention to the psychological dimensions and helping people think about that, they can all get acted out in rather destructive conflict. And just to go back to what we were doing last week, I mean, it's, we had our 2 days on Zoom, which was utterly exhausting, by the way. I felt the day after was like completely, all I needed was to lie down in a dark room to physically recover. But, before we had those 2 days, we had a huge number of meetings over many, many months in order to set up this program. There was a lot of work done in terms of boundary crossing into this system, finding out what they wanted, what we could do for them, what they could do for us. A lot of spade work has to take place before you can arrive in the room with the system and start working with it. And managing that in itself is quite a complex process. Would you say? I mean, I think boundary crossing starts right from the moment, really, right from the beginning. The client gets in touch with you and asks you to do something.
Yeah. All right. I think our time is up. Steve, is that so?
Yeah, that's a good spot to pause and allow us to come back and have deeper conversation in a few minutes. So thank you so much. It's really very, very good, and I appreciate the sharing. So what we're going to do now is Lisa, who is our producer for Nexus and director today. So we use this language a little differently now as you think about it. As we do this more, as you said, David, the exhausting nature of Zoom meetings. People are coming in to support them. And so Lisa, the director, is a person who during the actual session can help provide the support to keep things moving. So thank you, Lisa, for all that you're doing. And producers can play a little bit larger role, as we know. And she's playing both roles. And today she's helping us manage this. So Lisa, if you could, we'll take our panelists will stay in the main room. And then the guests that have joined us today, if you can put them into trios so they can have a deeper conversation about what they heard, what your reactions are, and what you're curious about, or what you'd like to, what questions that might be bubbling up for you. So we'd like to go ahead and create the breakout rooms. The panelists, you'll stay here and you all can have a conversation. You might take a little break or whatever, but we'll take about 15 minutes. The students in the room here are going to grab some food and have a chat with each other about what they heard, what the reactions are, what questions they have. And then we'll come back in about 15 minutes and we'll check in. And and have a more conversation from there. So you all get a chance to talk amongst yourselves, the guests that are speaking today. And for the rest, the guests that are here visiting and listening in, you'll get to breakout room in trios, which Lisa is creating right now. And we in here, we'll do a little breakout, have some conversation, then we'll all come back and say hi to each other in about 15 minutes. Should be about 20 after the hour, somewhere in that range. So Lisa, do you have everything that you need? Great. Okay, so the room's showing up. I'll be turning off the volume and everything in this room, so you, the panelists, we won't be listening in on your conversation per se. So have a nice conversation. See you back in about 15 minutes.
Okay, so anyone who's not a panelist, I'll send you to a room, but feel free that we've done an hour together. So if you need to take a 5-minute break before you come back together to chat, feel free to do that.
So Lisa, are you sending us off to another room or we're staying here?
You're staying here. I'm
Awesome.
keeping all the panelists together so they can chat while they're on their break getting some lunch.
Thanks.
Okay, so Lisa, can you hear me?
Yes.
I see that I'm not assigned.
Well, how we've been doing it is letting the panelists chat with each other.
But I'm not
And-
even in that room.
You're in the
Yeah,
main
yeah.
room. You're staying
Oh,
here.
okay,
Yes.
I am, sorry.
We're
I
all
see how it
staying
works.
together, Manny.
Yeah, I can see that now, yeah.
Yes.
So Manny and David, I've been publishing a series of books on different, very specific aspects of what I'm calling Biologic OD. And I'm particularly interested in this idea of sort of managing the anxiety and the kinds of unconscious as well as conscious kinds of anxieties. And what are the kinds of things that we can do, you know?
And turn it back over to you all. And keep the conversation going and just check in with the people that dropped in and see if they have any questions and so forth, and just allow it to emerge, okay?
Okay. So anyone in the virtual audience that wants to ask a question?
Oh, and at the end of a really fine 15 minutes or so with my two new colleagues, I'm Dave Fearon, we started to talk about something that I wonder if is not the top issue of all of us in our day, and that is what's going on in Ukraine specifically, but all of the things that ripple in and out of the Ukraine and what it's showing us in very ugly detail is the difference between people who are forced into an autocratic totalitarian way of existence and the desire to spread that way, which is happening in the United States as well, versus the true need for everything we've heard about today, for people to get together, share what's going on, figure out some ways to move forward. And the urgency of that is something I've never seen in my 79 years. So I don't want to throw, a huge bucket of cold water on this day, but while we are going on and looking at hopefully rescuing some companies and small organizations and nonprofits, maybe not even rescuing them, but letting them know they need it. We have this going on. So what are any of our panelists think about our responsibility in fostering collaboration that'll eventually offset totalitarian horror?
Well, Dave, I really would like to respond to your question and your challenge, if you don't mind, everybody else. Yeah, because I agree with you absolutely. It's an issue here which challenges all of us in our work. When the invasion occurred, that week I was tremendously depressed. I felt that my life's work had been rubbished. That the real issues on this planet are might is right. To knock people down, to bully them, to act in this totalitarian way seems to be the pattern of the future. And it's gaining ground. And all my values around liberal democracy, participative democracy, all of those values of mine seem to be under threat. But there was one a particular thought that helped me to understand what I was experiencing, and that is the world has taken a psychotic turn. We are experiencing a world psychosis in which delusion and paranoid fantasy, grandiosity of all-encompassing motherhood, the mother country fantasy, all of that is taking hold of people, not just Russia, but in many other parts of the world.
That's right.
And I fear for that.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And the depressing part of it is I think my most optimistic kind of idea is that this is another Luddite kind of revolt in the face of such technological change that we're facing, and the need to find new economic models that don't lead to the kind of inequality that we're seeing in parts of the Western world. But then there's this other part too, which many years ago, I did an exploration of the space of evil, and kind of in a shamanic thing. And what I learned from that was that evil comes when I have no connection to anyone. And that's festered long enough now that I want to make people hurt as much as I do. And in that space, the thought of connection is painful to me. And so I don't know how we do any of this kind of work in a space where there's no desire for connection. That's where I get. And then I go, so the only solution I know is have a bigger stick than the bullies, which of course just recreates the very same dynamic. And
yeah.
I'm feeling very stuck.
I think what you're saying, Gervase, is so true. And digging into people that were recruited to ISIS, for example, it wasn't their religious conviction or thing. It was young men who didn't feel that they belonged anywhere. So they were like, they just needed to belong anywhere. And ISIS knew this. So they recruited young, lonely men. And so I think we need to understand this. We need to understand why people feel lonely, why they feel they don't belong, why they're not happy. And I think we need to find more meaning in our lives. Again, not only, pursue happiness, but pursue meaningfulness in our lives. And that is, that's a huge job. But I think starting off with aiming for meaningfulness instead of happiness, because happiness is something that is just, it comes and goes. It's something you can buy. While meaningfulness is something which could be even painful, but it's meaningful at the same time. So I think it encompasses so much more of where we need to go in the future. And I think we need to start to understand the fundamentals of human beings and start to acknowledge that we need to have conversations about fundamental things in kindergartens and at schools.
I would like to add another thought, and I agree with all what you said. And I think we need, it's obviously a sobering experience, but there have been many before in the last centuries or last decades or whatever. And I think probably we have to part from the idea, which we all embrace as we're here, is that human evolution is actually an evolution towards more liberal societies and so on. Yeah, so probably and for a long time I was fascinating of the model of spiral dynamics. I think it's totally rubbish nowadays, and I don't know whether you've read the book of David Graeber and David Vengro, The Dawn of Everything. Has anybody read it already? Read it. Can you see it? The Dawn of Everything. It's one of the most discussed books of the last year. And well, what they say is there have been democratic and liberal societies in human history, and actually when the Europeans invaded Americas, they destroyed a lot of liberal societies there. Not all Native American societies were liberal, but some were. And some had values which 1,000 years ago had values which we just started to develop 100, 150, 200 years ago. So probably okay, so that's not very optimistic, but what I want to say with it is I think we have to engage in the systems where we see that we have an impact. So we have to strengthen the systems we believe in. But I don't see much perspective in China or Russia for the next 50 years or something like that. I mean, China is the other issue, isn't it? It's not a liberal society. And people believe in it. People are happy in China, probably more than in Russia, I guess.
Yeah.
Mike,
Sure.
did you want to say something? Mike McGovern? I saw you moving toward the screen.
Well,
it seems to me that the
just,
work that we do and devoted ourselves to, we are, unfortunately, I think we're being dragged right up to the front row in terms of those of us who think we understand human behavior in organizations, and we understand change, and we understand practice. All of those understandings, among all the other ways that people are serving medicine and politics and so forth, I think we are part of all of those professions in terms of who we serve, but we also now it's on us in a way. And my colleague Kaliso, who we spoke with in our group, is in South Africa, and she was experiencing some of the frustration that got me to speak about this in the forum now. It's just, it's on us. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, what have I got? That's why I love that Steve's getting us to do this, because all the tools and all the other ways that we are in doing what we do are going to be on call. Hopefully the phone will ring, because I think we've got a lot to offer.
Yeah.
The most powerful work I've participated in around these kind of things is Arnie Mendel's world work. I don't know if you guys, and, you know, but the problem there is the people still have to want to be in the room.
That's right.
And
phone's
how
not ringing.
You know, you're dealing with people who have no interest in being in the room. They just want to blow you up.
okay.
I'm kind of lost on that one personally. And
Well,
I just draw your attention to Otto Scharmer's latest blogs. It's really interesting application of his theory to the Ukraine thing. He talks about absencing as kind of the inverted U to presencing. Like I understood his model way better after reading that than I had up to that point. It's really, again, it's an explanation, helps you understand how we got in this mess. Don't know that it actually helps us get out of it, you know, without well-intentioned people in positions of power.
I agree. I got a lot out of Otto's using his lens to look at what's going on. And I try to look at, if there's a little light in this whole situation, and I hope it doesn't seem too abstract. But Tonje, when you were talking about leader and leadership, if we look at the difference in leader and leadership, so in Ukraine, we are seeing leadership coming from maybe the most unexpected places. Where in Russia, we are also seeing a leader and a different type of a leadership. So one of the things that I learned from one of my visiting Harvard professors is always in every situation learning where the leadership exists, and it may not be in the person who carries the title leader.
Oh, yeah.
So that was, it just got illuminated as I look at this situation with all of the stress and the heaviness I feel, because someone just reminded us that even as we experience this with the rest of the world, there are people still turn to us, Gervase, looking for helping to make meaning and make sense.
Good point. Well, thank you for considering the issue. I didn't want to overtake everything else that was said, but then again, we're being overtaken, so I can't ignore it. I don't think.
Sure, that is very important.
Yeah.
If there are other questions, hop in. I was just going to add to it that it did come up in Friday's conversation. Keith McCandless brought up the same, discussion and need for participation to have positive change in that area.
And what's really cool is, I don't know if you know this, but Mannie and David, I'm bringing our doctoral students over to work with you all at the Tavistock Institute this summer in July. I'm sorry, it's pretty loud. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me a little bit better?
Yeah.
That's right. The students are having a great conversation, as you can tell. So you prompted them, but they're in great conversation. So what I was saying is I'm bringing the first cohort over to London where we have an experience we've created that we're going to be doing with the Tavistock Institute in July. So hopefully they'll get to see it. We're having one evening. Part of the experience is to talk about the history of the social behavioral sciences and with elders and other people from the Tavistock Institute to have like a fireside chat, and have a little beverage and talk and just reminisce with you all. So it'll be in July, and I'll make sure I'm not sure if they've mentioned it to you all, if you've heard about it, but we're now getting where we can confirm it. We weren't sure if we could do it, but we now can confirm pretty much this month that we're going to be able to come over. And so we'll be coming over like the second week of July. So I look forward to seeing you all in person.
Same here, Steve. We look forward to being with you.
Yeah, it'd be very nice. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Nice. Yeah. So so I'm curious, what were some of the takeaways from the I'm sorry it's so loud here. They're having a great time. So I always say that when there's rebellion like that, it's really good. So and I've had that happen, and students will think like, oh my, it's okay if I'm talking. I go, yeah, you all are just rebelling perfectly. Keep talking, keep having a great conversation. And so what I was saying is, what were some of the highlights from your conversation today that you would want to take away with you? Is there a nugget that you want to take home or take away from today? Appreciations from somebody else?
Well, I have an appreciation, Steve, which comes out of the point that Dave raised about the Russian invasion and the Ukrainian situation, and comments made by others afterwards, which is that in spite of the awfulness that is manifest around us, we still have a responsibility to keep alive the work that we do, which is about trying to promote understanding, a positive understanding that leads to change, while recognizing the difficulties, the improbabilities, and the people who don't want to be in the room. We have to work with all of those elements and keep our spirits up. That's why I think a conference like this is so good, to hear about the thinking of our colleagues in different parts of the world, in support of this kind of, well, in support of our work.
I think the thing I'm taking away really is that, in terms of the sort of political global dynamic that we're in, we have to fight just as hard for our ideas and what we believe in as the opposition fights. The totalitarians fight tooth and nail to subject us, basically, and we just have to be equally tough to fight from our side. We're in a fight, and we just have to recognize that.
Yeah.
And not think, oh, it's all going to get better and sort of sit back. It's only by actively getting involved in our local communities, our political parties, our friends, our neighbors, and get active. Because they're not going to go away, and they're not going to lie down unless we really fight for what we believe in. That's how I see it.
Great.
We've got to defend freedom and our democratic principles. I'm very frightened about what's happening in France, with the presidential election. Marine Le Pen is essentially a fascist. She could be the next president of France. I hope the left unite and, get their act together and realize they've got to vote for Macron in the second round. Otherwise, she may win, because she's on the populist Trump bandwagon, and a lot of people are worried and frightened about their situations, and these strong totalitarian leaders become very attractive. They're seen as saviors. Of course, they're not.
We have at least 28 states in this country that have, through their particular legislators, enacted reduction of voting opportunity.
Yeah.
They have a rule now that you cannot say the word gay in an elementary school or you'll be arrested. I mean, we've got that happening in this country, and we're the ones who, I think, take for granted more than almost any other place how
it's the same in the UK. They're trying to introduce ID, that you can't vote unless you turn up with an ID card. Absolutely, unacceptable, really.
Yeah.
And they're now putting through Parliament that the police can ban a protest if it's too noisy.
That's right. Well, these things are happening, and we're the people who have the ideas and the voices and the network to do something. But all I said in my little group was, I almost figure I better get down to my village square and hold up a sign saying, "Can we talk?" And then someone pointed out, well, we live in Connecticut. I don't think there are many rabble-rousers living in Connecticut. And I think, well, maybe I'll put my plaque up anyway.
I mean, I agree that we need to keep thinking and we need to keep dialogue and reflection, but at the same time, action is required. Thinking without action is really just paralysis sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to build on that a little bit. Acting without thinking is also an issue.
Exactly.
Because what I find very interesting in watching the political dynamics in the United States is the right is very insightful about leveraging. And by understanding that the greatest point of leveraging is actually at the primary level.
Yeah.
Where people are not that well funded, where a few dollars goes a long way in terms of getting your person involved, and they fill that pipeline in the political spectrum right at the primary level. So I don't see in the United States that level of sophistication and understanding how to use power, understanding the system that how the political system operates, and finding the areas where the left can look in and find ways to bring about change by understanding the system better and understanding where the leverage is and what the strategies might be. So I think there's wonderful opportunities there for the more progressive political folks to understand how to influence outcomes in terms of elections and the distribution of power and those kind of things. So that's an area, for example, with organization design, organization development, where there is a need for the kind of work that we do, maybe understand those systems and perhaps introduce at the community level and other levels within a society, how to go about bringing positive change within a society. It's an area I think that's full of opportunities.
Yeah.
Good way, good point.
One of my bugaboos is looking at the ecosystem, the news ecosystem that's been created by the internet. Right? There's essentially three business models: get it right, clickbait, and produce disgust and hate. And unfortunately, the produce, disgust, hate, fear business model is very lucrative.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a study that just came out a few days ago. Some guys at, I think it was Yale and Berkeley, they paid people who watch Fox News to watch CNN for a period of time, and found, surprise, surprise, that a whole bunch of divisiveness went away. You know, and I have to note that the Murdochs are in the UK and in the US and Australia, and if you want to find divisive political environments, that's the place to go. And like I'm at the point now, you know, in Canada, we've had this national regulator that most of us learned to hate for a while, but now I'm loving, because for one thing, the Murdochs can't get into Canada because of them, but it may be time that we have to start doing something about regulating news, you know?
Yeah.
And that raises a whole lot of complex issues. And there's someplace OD might be very valuable, as in helping that conversation to produce something productive. But until that gets fixed, I don't know what chance we have.
I think that is really important, because if we look a bit back, the world has gone in a positive direction for many, 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 many years. But now all of a sudden we see that has changed, that there are the things that are happening today, and also the things that have happened just, you know, recent years. We see that there are so much more polarization, and to do something about that, we need to understand why. And that is, of course, very, very complex, but it's also, I think, understanding what you're raising, Gervase, understanding how social media and the internet affects this, because it plays a huge part. And I, for one, cannot understand that government has not regulated things. Yeah. I think it's, especially to our young kids, I think it's a lack of responsibility that is, saddens me.
Tonje, we are getting into really fundamental discussion now. I agree with you from my side, but a lot of people in the world don't think necessarily that the world has progressed in a positive way. Talking to my, let's say, Arabic friends, for example, a lot of people in the global south, they have quite a different view on that. So we must also accept, although I'm really fully with you and with the rest, we must accept that the view we are sharing here is the view of I wouldn't say a global minority, but a certain, let's say, a certain class of people from the West or from the North, or something like that. Yeah, and that makes me sad. That makes me sad, because it's really also my values. But maybe we need to be that honest to ourselves, is that not everybody shares our view.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to build on that a little bit as well. The Aspen Institute in the United States is promoting dialogue sessions between disparate groups of different cultural contexts and also political persuasions, to try to facilitate a conversation that gets beyond the polarized positions to a deeper understanding of the relationships of people to one another within a society, and trying to imbue these skills with people so they can have the kind of dialogues that build a broader base of understanding to find more common ground in communities and stuff. So there's activity underway that's happening, and perhaps there's opportunities to cultivate that and bring it into a broader audience and a broader market.
So thanks, Mike. And I'm going to just do a real quick process check with you all. I'm going to go back because we're wrapping up our class for the day, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. If do you all want to continue having a little bit more dialogue, and Lisa can wrap up with you, and I'm going to get back to them, or you all, and she'll check in with you on that. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to say thank you, and the class, I'm going to check in with them, and then we'll say thank you, and then I'll turn over to Lisa, and then I'm going to go back to wrapping them up for the residency for this weekend. But I'm personally just really grateful for your generosity. I think that first and foremost is the heart. Your heart of generosity is it's moving for me. It inspires me and encourages me. So thank you for that. And then the learning and the conversation. I think there's so much great art and science and practice and stories that you all have shared today. So thank you for that. And as I said, this is just the beginning. So you'll be invited to more and more, and you know my commitment. Yeah, dinner for Holger. Yes, and this has been really nice. So hey, everybody, say thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, guys.
We'll have a great rest of the day, and I'll be talking with you all soon. Lisa's got the controls, and I'm going to get back to wrapping them up for residency.
Okay,
bye for now.
thank you.
All right. Well, yes.
Lisa,
sorry.
Okay.
I think
I'm
we
gonna
all
say
need to rush out
goodbye.
and have a drink.
Yes,
right now.
I'm going to step
Thank
out.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Lovely to meet you all. Fantastic conversation.
Take care.
Wonderful.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much.
Yeah, really good.
Thank you.
Work.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
Thank you all.